Ano chicken? Ahani. Igu gasto no ina ke chicken. Agotena. Agotasu. Aseta. Digi yohiste negaste hi agadoi. Igu ge yu hi chicken ahani. Degatasu. Degi lamstanela. Ale. Igelung tanasang stalang. Aya chicken. Killawi go hita. Iganigiste in Castillo. Again. Don't show. You got that down. To go to you.
Soon after the Treaty of New Echota was ratified in the United States Senate, by a margin of just 1 vote, Major Ridge and his son John left their homes and moved to the land west of the Mississippi to establish a new Cherokee nation. The Ridges were going the way of other tribes around them, the Creeks, the Choctaws, and the Chickasaws. But less than 2,000 of the 18,000 Cherokee citizens joined the Ridges in their journey west.
The people are told they have 2 years to remove themselves peacefully with support from the federal government, supplying and make sure that they get their payments. And only a handful of people leave. They continue planting their fields and making improvements on their farms. That was their land. They weren't going to leave.
For the vast majority of the Cherokee people, removal was not an option. It just was not. They couldn't comprehend removal. They couldn't comprehend that a handful of people signing a piece of paper would be enough to remove them from their homelands.
John Ross is trying to hold the nation together, to keep it in place. He's desperately seeking a way, any possible way, that the Cherokees can remain in the East.
I need your help. A paper will come soon. Please sign it. You can trust me to fight this. Here.
The Cherokee chief knew he was working against time. Deadline for removal was May 1838, and 7,000 federal troops had ringed Cherokee territory. White settlers began to close the circle, like vultures, said one federal officer, ready to strip the Cherokees of everything they have. Still, John Ross had faith in the common decency of white Americans. He thought the Ridges' narrowly ratified treaty could be overturned, and he took one last shot, authoring a bold statement from the Cherokee Nation in the form of a written petition to be laid before the United States Senate. "We acknowledge our own feebleness," the Cherokees said. "Our only fortress is the justice of our cause. Our only appeal on earth is to your tribunal." The petition arrived at Ross's hotel in Washington just weeks before the removal deadline. It had been signed by 15,665 people, virtually every Cherokee in the East.
There were some sheets that were blue, some were white, some were almost orange, some were long, some were wide. And they sewed those all together in a scroll. And if you laid those out, they'd be over 160 feet long. And John Ross had prepared for one of the Cherokee's friends in the Senate to place that upon the table in the Senate, that protest, so they would reconsider the execution of that treaty. And before that senator could present it, a congressman from Kentucky and one from Maine had a duel, and one killed the other. And Congress adjourned.
While a frustrated John Ross waited out the congressional recess that followed the killing, he wrote home to his sister-in-law. As soon as they bury their illustrious brother, Congress can get back to the business of dealing with us savages. Congress, however, did not circle back to Chief Ross's petition. It was simply pushed aside. The Cherokee people's near-unanimous plea never received the consideration of the United States Senate. On the morning of May 26, 1838, 3 days after the removal deadline, federal troops and state militia began what they called the Assembly of the Cherokee people.
Everything that wasn't actually on the person now belonged to the state. And they were forced out into yards and on to the roads with whatever they had on their back.
There were staging areas around the Cherokee Nation with wooden stockades. And the people were herded into what were literally cattle pens.
Come on, keep moving.
A few weeks after the roundup began, the first detachments of Cherokees were shipped west under military guard. Word quickly got back to the stockades. Drought and summer disease had made the trip a march of death. Chief Ross was frantic to avoid further loss. He convinced U.S. military officials to let him take over the organization and supply of removal, and to let his people sit tight until fall, after the season of disease had passed. A few hundred Cherokees who agreed to renounce tribal citizenship were allowed to remain on their farms in North Carolina. The rest, more than 12,000 captive Cherokees, waited in the fetid stockades. Prisoners, one missionary remembered, were obliged to lie at night on the naked ground, in the open air, exposed to wind and rain. And in this way, many are hastening to a premature grave. Half the infants and all the aged have died directly, and 1/4 of the remainder. Through June, July, August, and September, they waited, until, at the beginning of October, the Cherokee Nation was finally pushed west. It was early December before the final group began the 850-mile trip. By then, the long line of Cherokee travelers stretched from Illinois into Kentucky, unbroken in places for 3 miles. John Ross had seen that the detachments were well supplied for the 3 to 4 month trek. But winter storms made the Mississippi and Ohio rivers impassable, stranding thousands for a full month.
No one could have predicted that one of the hardest winters in memory would strike that year. When they reached the Mississippi River, the river was frozen. There were 3 different detachments trapped between the Mississippi and another river frozen behind them. And there they sat for weeks in deep, deep snow and ice.
As long as they were moving, maybe it wasn't so bad, but when you actually had to wait for the ice and sit there, and maybe you're sleeping on snow, but you're probably sleeping on melted mud, and you're sick, your baby's sick, your grandmother's sick, and there's nothing you can do about it.
The harsh weather so slowed progress that supplies of dried corn and salt pork began to run short. When white settlers along the road recognized the Cherokees' need, a few offered help. Others took the opportunity to cash in on the woe, charging wildly inflated prices for grain. Cherokee men were soon too depleted to hunt